you got thrown out of your rooms, your paintings were confiscated, you had a very, very hard time, and you knew you had something to give. This was a long time, by the way, as most of you probably know, this was a long, long time before the water lilies. The water lilies came in the last 20, 25 years of his life when he was older. He had never heard of a water lily, likely, at that time. And then of course I said to myself as I was studying, well, who did he love? Because, I like to write love stories, and I'm sure there were women crazy about him. And that's how I discovered Camille. And very little is known about her. And I studied and I read everything I could, and I wrote to scholars, and I looked at her pictures. I lay on the couch for hours looking at her pictures, trying to understand, and thus the book was formed. I think I had a still earlier influence in that both of my parents, my father, my stepfather, and my mother were all artists. And I grew up with the easel, with the smell of oil paint, with the very carefully cleaned brushes in the jar, with the very carefully sharpened pencils, which I was not to touch without permission. And I was taken to museums as a very young child and told the story of the struggles of the Impressionists. So I think at this particular time in my life, this all came together for me, and I decided that I was going to embark on writing a novel. This novel is actually, it's actually kind of two main stories wound together, which I think makes it interesting. It's this young man, this passionate young man, who's thrown himself into the art world, and very poor, and meets this beautiful girl, and falls madly in love with her. She's upper class. She's very idealistic. She throws away everything to be with him. She just idolizes the life of a starving artist. Isn't it wonderful? It was kind of, I think, the way people did in a little bit in the 60s when something, materialism was nothing, and they wanted just to express themselves and live this romantic life. And so they fell in love, and they made a life together, but a life with his compulsion to paint and her personal difficulties and the poverty and everything made a lot of conflict. So it is the story of their life. The relatively short story of their life, because she died young, which I say in the beginning of the book. And there's also this incredible story of these young men who wanted to paint so much, and they stood shoulder to shoulder, and they went forth in the world, and eventually they banded together, and they called themselves the Impressionists. Now, I'll just tell you how they got that name, which is kind of it wasn't meant to be a compliment when it was first given. In 1874, they often couldn't even find a place to exhibit their work, and the sales were very sporadic. And so they decided to band together and give an independent exhibition in an art studio. And they did. And not too many people came. But some critics came, and as critics do, they had something to say. And one of the critics said, "Wallpaper, in its embryonic state, is more finished than that seascape." He was referring to Impression Sunrise. And then he decided to give a title to this really very nasty article, and he called it "The Exhibition of the Impressionists." And the name lasted a lot longer than he did, and is known throughout the world, and what was meant to be a slur became something just wonderful for a lot of people.